Where do you get your news, your information about the world? How do you process it? How do you figure out what is true and what is not true? These are critical questions, and they have a lot to do with economics. Long ago, at least in the United States, most people got their news from one of the centralized networks. There weren't that many to choose from. And you had reporters like Edward R. Murrow and Walter Cronkite or Tom Brokaw, Peter Jennings. Yes, all of them were middle aged white guys, kind of like me, that seemed to be the voice of authority. The main difference, though, is that they really earned it. I mean, for example, Walter Cronkite was hearing information about the ongoing US war in Vietnam, and he had trouble making sense of it. And so he said, I'm going to go there myself. I mean, he had been a war correspondent in World War II. He knew something about how battles were conducted, went to Vietnam, and came back and said, there are no clear objectives. We cannot win. The Johnson administration said, that's it, we've lost Cronkite. We've lost the war. And indeed, things went south pretty quickly for the administration and their ability to promote and conduct the war because Walter Cronkite went there for himself and he had some idea what he was talking about. These days, we have a lot more information that comes in from many different sources. And so you, in your daily news diet, can pick and choose which source you get it from. And of course, you're going to look for news in places that you rely on. What do you rely on? And what do you perceive as true? Well, there's something called confirmation bias, and we all have it. We have preconceived ideas about what is going on in the world. And when we see a story that seems to conform with what we've already decided must be true, we naturally believe it. This is reinforced by the way that we get news. YouTube, right here, will give you stories similar to what you've already seen and give you a constant diet of it. Facebook does the same thing. And so if you like a certain channel that has a certain perspective, a certain bias even, that they're maybe even an agenda that they're just pushing really, really hard, YouTube's going to give you more of it. And this is true whether you're talking about an economic perspective, a political perspective, or you believe the earth is flat. YouTube says that they're not going to be dealing with those anymore, but you can certainly find that here. This is the problem with confirmation bias. In a world where we have a tremendous amount of information, something like a fire hose aimed at a teacup, to quote Scott Adams of Dilbert fame, how do you process it? I mean, in a certain sense, the information that many of us receive is worse than no information. Imagine for a second that you're out in the middle of nowhere. Let's just say it's the 19th century for the sake of argument. You get very little news, very little information. What you have is time to think about each little piece that you get. Does it conform with your needs, your view of the world? Okay, you're going to definitely have that confirmation bias. We humans are just pattern matching machines, basically. That's how we survived. But you're going to know what you need to know generally. You can seek out certain things, and that will be that. In a world where there is a wide variety of information and some of it is deliberately skewed one way or another, someone can feed you a steady diet of bad information, information that actually leaves you less informed about the world. And because of confirmation bias and how things are delivered, you might receive this absolutely constantly. And you might form an opinion which is unquestionably wrong, such as an opinion that the earth is flat. This can happen. How do we combat it? How do we deal with this in a way that makes some sense? Now, I first came into this from the perspective of economics. This is how I first became interested in economics back in 2007. because it was very clear that there was something seriously wrong in the world, and I had no idea what. The only thing I could do was read very lengthy 2,000 word some odd articles written by people who were in bond trading or in foreign exchange, people who were very knowledgeable about their subject. And they would write these long articles. They're not professional writers, okay? They're very good at what they do, but they're not writers. But long articles full of jargon, full of technical terms that were very hard to digest. And I had to learn how to read them. And it became clear what was going on in the world, that everything was far more brittle and in danger of collapse. Now, this may sound like I'm just, making things up. This is my perspective, as it were. This is my confirmational bias. But I looked at things very, very carefully, and I'll give you just one example as to how much people in the know really understood what was wrong way, way back. In 2006, Ben Bernanke was appointed chairman of the Federal Reserve. He was an academic man with practically no experience. I mean, where did they get Ben Bernanke in 2006? The answer is that Ben Bernanke's PhD thesis was on the mistakes made by the Federal Reserve during the Great Depression. Interesting choice in 2006. You see, what has been going on in terms of how brittle our economy is, how it has very little resiliency, how the old mechanisms just aren't working very well, how there is this constant deflationary problem, and maintaining a stable money supply is difficult, was well known back then. And so when the crisis of 2007, yes, hit, Ben Bernanke was there ready to not make the same mistakes. They made different mistakes. And that's the issue. See, in the popular media, it was commonly said in 2008, nobody saw this coming. But in fact, many of us did. Because I'm so smart? No, because I sat down and I took the time to read the people who really knew what was going on. And it's difficult. That's the problem with our world today. As the world has gotten smaller, we are more in contact with people, halfway around the world, doing very highly specialized jobs. We're closer together, and yet intellectually we're further apart. It's more difficult to understand this. And very few people have the time to sit down and read things written by these subject matter experts, like bond traders, like foreign exchange people, who are very, very smart. But in order to explain their position, well, it takes a lot of words. And we have the too long, don't read problem all over the place. One of the things I've been trying to do here is to condense important topics down into something that is digestible and friendly and deliberately not threatening or too authoritarian. Because I believe how we consume and digest the information is as important as the delivery. How do we consume this? How do we get to know what is true and what is not true? I think there are two very key techniques that need to be developed. The first is to always take the long view. Again, with the economic news, what has happened here in this crisis caused by the virus is not something that is directly caused by the global shutdown. Certainly that exacerbated everything, but it has mostly highlighted something that has been coming on for a long time. And the people in power, going way back to the Bush administration, understood that there was something that just wasn't working properly. Now, if you take the long view, something like blame just goes out the window. This was during the Bush administration. The Obama administration handled the TARP. The Trump administration is handling things now. Who is to blame? Whose fault is this? It's been going on for a long time. In the long view, something like blame just doesn't make any sense anymore. Fixing the problem becomes much more interesting. And blame is useful to the extent that it helps us fix the problem, but that's about all. The second thing that is important is that most people, when they digest news, separate it into either it's true or it's false. It's one or the other. Most things that you read are sort of true. There's a kernel of truth even in the most vile propaganda. There has to be. It is very important to sort of file things away as, well, this could be true, but we don't know. I mean, is it possible that this happens? See, confirmation bias wants us to separate out everything, and we believe that which is conforms to what we've already thought. But if we learn to accept things sort of halfway in between, then we have a fighting chance. Now, there is one bias that many, many people have, and that is that nothing happens that is completely random. Things always happen for a reason. And this is a serious problem. It's extremely top down. All right? There are those at the top who want to manipulate you. And this is the real origin of all conspiracy theories. The conspiracy theories are actually very comforting. Take the issue of the virus in particular. There are a lot of theories going around that this was deliberately crafted by China as a bioweapon, or some other machination that escaped from a lab, etc., etc. There is a great appeal to this because what? There is somebody to blame. It is somebody's fault. And because there is somebody to blame, we can stop them, we can seek justice, we can seek reparation, and we can put an end to it. When you look at things from the top down, there is always somebody who's in charge. The alternative is that things happen somewhat randomly. I mean, if there is truly hundreds of and potentially thousands of these viruses just like this one out there, what can we do about it? I mean, the only thing we can do is learn how to cooperate and work hard to make sure that this doesn't happen again, working together. It's much more frightening. There's no one to blame. And that's the problem that we have. The number one confirmational bias that everyone has is that somebody is manipulating the system. That it's not all about individuals working hard from the bottom up, doing their own little thing. Now, even if you take that view that things happen for reasons that we don't understand, it becomes very difficult. I often say that people are people, but cultures are cultures. The idea is that if you were in the same situation as somebody else, that you would probably react the way they do. If you live in an authoritarian government, you what? Keep your head down, take care of business. Every day you don't have to deal with government is a good day. And you get by. But that's the problem. You see, cultures are cultures. The forces that impinge on somebody somewhere around the world might be hard to understand. You might do exactly the same thing in exactly the same situation, but understanding that situation is difficult. And so we have to file it all away. Your particular bias may not make sense at all, may not have anything to do with the situation. But of course, we all have our biases, and we all look for things to be explained by what? Something has happened. So, how do you get your news? How do you process it? What do you do about confirmational bias? I want to talk about this some more because, well, as much as we might want to devise an economy that benefits the people and the things that are important in this world, a democratic republic requires everybody to have the right information and be able to respond to it. That means they have to have access to it, and they have to filter it all out to get what is true, and they have to be able to process that in a way that makes sense. In a world full of more information, this is actually more difficult. In a world of specialization increasing all the time, we need to be able to understand each other. And it is a problem. In 2008, everyone said, we never saw this coming. Many of us saw it for a full year in advance because we sat down and read thousands and thousands of words about it. The same is true today. Many of us have seen the economic situation which is still unfolding here in May 2020. We, we know what's going on. We know that deflation is a serious problem, and the primacy of the US dollar as the dollar standard around the world is very, very dangerous. We can see what is likely to happen. It's chaotic. A whole lot of things have opened up. It's bounded chaos. We can describe the boundaries, but within them, that's about it. How do we get this information? How do we process it? Some guy talking on YouTube might get us somewhere. But I want to talk about this a little bit more because in terms of economic news, it's very, very difficult to process it, and what we have in place just doesn't work very well at all. But it's not the only news that we have a problem with. Where do you get your news? How do you process it? How much are you willing to read in a day? How much are you willing to dive into and sit down and analyze? How much time do you have? How much do you insist that things must be either true or false? How much do you insist that everything must happen for a reason? These are important biases that we all have, but we need to work through them and become better consumers of news. And that's what I want to talk about now, away from simple economic analysis.